What's up, guys? KS here. Thanks for joining me today as always. When I heard that Beretta was releasing a single stack APX, I was stoked. Both the full-size and compact versions were fun to review, though they didn't necessarily blow me away. Keep in mind that everyone will have different tastes and some absolutely love the APX. The styling can take a bit of getting used to with those over-pronounced serrations and somewhat thick slide, but I will say the overall look is good in my book. Now looks aren't everything, and the APX has it where it counts. Good ergos, decent sights, and a trigger that stacks up nicely among its peers. That brings us to the APX Carry, a rather petite single stack which carries forward the design language but is just about pocket worthy. It replaces the Beretta Nano but oddly retains several key features, one of which I was very skeptical about. We'll get to that soon. Let's jump in and see if the newest APX is a serious concealed carry contender. Alright, let's do a couple of quick comparisons and see how the APX Carry stacks up with some of the popular competition like this Smith & Wesson Shield 2.0. You guys know this is one of my favorite firearms. It's a carry firearm for me. I like it quite a bit. So stack these two guys up neck and neck as best we can. Now the overall length on the APX Carry is 5.63 inches, so that shield is going to be just a hair longer, although not by much. And the height on the APX is 4.17 inches. I'll give you an idea of what that looks like there. Now the barrel length is 3 inches, and the width, believe it or not, is 0.9 inches. Now that shield, I think the shield looks thinner than that, but it really isn't. So it's very interesting. And I mean, these guys really are lined up as close as they can be. So it's not an optical illusion. APXs always just appear to be wider as far as I'm concerned. Now the weight unloaded is 19.8 ounces. So this guy is definitely a light little gun. Now, one other popular carry gun I thought would be very interesting to stack it up against would be the Glock 43X, another carry gun of mine. So we'll see how these guys stack up. And once again, the slide on the 43X is going to be just a bit longer, maybe 1/4 of an inch, almost 1/2 an inch longer. And then height-wise, now you'll notice I've switched out the magazine on the APX Carry for the 8-round magazine. We'll look at both of those a little bit more closely here in just a moment. But all of a sudden, we'll stack these guys up a little bit better so they're neck and neck. So it's interesting that the APX Carry is almost just a touch taller than the Glock 43X. Now that 43X carrying 10 rounds versus the 8 rounds in the APX Carry. So I don't know if that actually means anything to you or not, but still an interesting side-by-side nonetheless. All right, we'll take a walk around the APX Carry here in just a moment, but before we do, let's take a look at the magazines. Again, this is a 6-round steel magazine, and it does have a finger extension on it. It does come with a flat base plate as well, so I like that they included that. Now, I run with the finger extension. I just prefer that. Just a little bit more grip on it is always helpful, especially in a small firearm. But like I said a moment ago, it does have an 8-round magazine as well that fully extends that grip, and I will say that if you're looking for a more full-size grip on a small gun, this is a small gun, this magazine is fantastic. I think it feels really good. It carries forward the texture and all of that good stuff. And speaking of texture, as we move up onto the grip itself, we do have several different textures going on, one of which are some small, kind of medium aggressive little texture here with the Beretta logo in the middle. I'll be honest with you, I actually really like this. I think it looks good and it's pretty functional. I mean, it's not terrifically aggressive. It's not going to beat you up, but aggressive enough to keep a grip on. And then the front and back straps, we have some really nice checkering, stippling, whatever you want to say. I dig this quite a bit. Same thing with its bigger brothers. I think the texture on this is really good, really bitey. And it's in the right place as well. And on a small firearm like this, man, you need it. You really do. Again, we'll talk more about the shooting experience in a moment, but this texture absolutely helps out. And the rest of the ergos are really nice. It's actually a pretty comfortable gun to hold, especially if you've got bigger hands, and I've got large hands, and again, this is this is darn small. Now, in terms of controls, we do have our magazine release here, some checkering on it. It is not ambi out of the box, though surprisingly, you can swap this around, so that's pretty cool. Not a lot of single stacks can do that, so kudos to Beretta for including that feature. And then we do have our slide stop, slide release here. It is not ambidextrous, though I would not anticipate single stacks typically having that. So still very usable as both slide stop and slide release. Now it is absent of any takedown lever or tabs or anything on the left side, which we're used to seeing. There actually is just a screw on the other side. We will take this down in a minute, but a very different disassembly ritual that goes on with this. Now, as we move around the frame, a couple of other things. We do have some lines here forward on the frame. They don't, I don't find them to serve as any sort of a reference because you can barely feel them, but I like the style. I think it looks good, if nothing else, but not a lot of function there. It does say APX. No rail or anything for all of your popular toys. Again, I wouldn't expect that on a small firearm. And a squared off front of the trigger guard, no texture or anything like that. But it is a big trigger guard, so you could definitely get a gloved finger in there. I don't think that would be a problem. And then one other thing, it does have a decocker. Now this will come in handy when we disassemble this, but it does have a decocker. So again, very interesting functionality. Overall, I'll be honest with you, I like the layout of the frame on the APX Carry. Now here's where we get into love or hate territory, the slide. And that's because of these serrations, the full-length serrations. There are some people that just don't dig it at all. I'll be honest with you, at first I didn't either, but it grew on me, and I actually like the APX line because it's just something very different. And I will say, these are usable. I've always found these to be just fine. I know there are some people that say that they're not usable. I haven't found that to be the case. And then we've got our Beretta logo here. And then on the other side, pretty plain Jane, nothing too special going on there. But as we move up on top of the slide, we get our sight set up. We do have a front white dot, and it's very simple, very plain Jane. It's actually a little bit muted. It's kind of hard to see, to be honest with you. So some fingernail polish, something like that, might solve that issue. Or you could replace it. I'm sure they're going to have some replacement sights if they don't already. Now, it does say APX on top. That's cool. Doesn't bother me a bit. And then we do have our rear sights. Now, this is where things get different. And I dig the rear sights. Very cool. They are blacked out serrated rears. Not a lot of tiny guns do that. So kudos to Beretta for that. Now, if it had an HD front sight, boy, I'll tell you what, this thing would be rocking and rolling as far as I'm concerned. And then we do have a little bit of a ledge for one-handed manipulations. And then we do have our little protruding guy right here. I know this is part of the function of the trigger. I can never remember it as I'm doing videos. Some people complain about this. I'll be honest with you. A lot of Berettas have it, and I've never once seen it when you're firing. So it doesn't impede the sight lineup or anything like that. So not a big deal there. But again, the overall slide layout, I actually dig. I know some people don't, but I'm a fan. Let's take a look at the disassembly of the Beretta APX Carry. Of course, it is unloaded. Now, a couple of things. And again, I mentioned that it does take some tools. We do have a decocker button. It's this little guy right here. That's going to release the trigger. And there we go. So now the trigger is actually inoperable. Nothing going on there at this point. And the next thing we have to do is rotate this screw 1/4 of a turn. So I'm going to take the back of a dummy round. This is dummy round, of course. Man, these things, they've seen a lot of abuse. It's about time to get some new ones. And once you turn that 1/4 of a turn, the slide just pops right off. So disassembly wise, I'm not a fan of using tools or anything, but it isn't difficult. It's pretty easy to do, which is good. And we'll take a look at all the parts here in just a moment, but we'll get everything out. Now, in terms of the slide, I just cleaned this thing, so it is a little over oiled. I do that in the beginning with all firearms as I'm breaking them in, just as a rule, as a habit. But in terms of cleaning and maintenance, it's as you would expect, nothing terribly exciting going on, but not difficult to do. And just another look there. So that's what you're getting into with the Carry. And then our frame, and again, a look at that trigger module, the bars, your rails there, they're actually really beefy rails, which is kind of nice. But this whole piece will be, can be removed, and it is serialized, of course. Then we'll take a look at the barrel. Nothing terrifically special about the barrel there. Maybe a tiny bit of a crown, which is kind of nice. We've got a good polished feed ramp, which is also a nice attention to detail. We've got a dual captive guide rod. Now, it is polymer on the inside. This is a very light guide rod. I actually would kind of like it to be steel, add just a little bit of weight to it. Now, that's a personal preference, of course. Now, getting this back together, it's actually a little bit of a trick to do. We reverse our process. We get our barrel back in, just like so. Get our guide rod and spring assembly back in. And so that is seated again like so. And then we'll throw this back on, and again, kind of an odd deal here, actually lock it back, and the reason is, if you don't, you're not going to be able to get that screw in. Now, sometimes the screw will rotate itself. I found on this one it just won't do it, which is kind of irritating to me, but you know, not the end of the world. But we're going to rotate this 1/4 turn, and we'll release this. Now, you'll notice that guide rod is sticking out a little bit, and that's because I found on this one, you actually have to rotate it just a little bit more than 1/4 turn, and that will make the guide rod disappear. So again, not my favorite type of disassembly. I would consider that a knock on the firearm personally. I don't like to use tools. That's a personal preference, of course, but there's the disassembly on the Beretta APX Carry. The shooting experience was a bit surprising. I've been spending quite a bit of time with larger and heavier guns, so transitioning back to something like the APX took some getting used to, but it wasn't bad. The grip is small, though the grip texture locks you in well. I like that there are several base plate options for the 6-round mag, so I went with the one with the finger extension. The recoil was noticeable, though more controllable than I was expecting. There's certainly muzzle flip, but getting the sights back on target was easy. The front sight sits nicely in the middle of a blacked out rear. It's something I've become a big fan of. The trigger takes some getting used to if you spend a lot of time with traditional strikers. Although we'll look more closely at it in a moment, if you're a fan of a double action pull, you'll probably dig it. All right, let's take a look at the trigger of the Carry for a moment or two. Now, right off the bat, in looking at the trigger, it is polymer and does have a safety lever on it. No thumb safety or anything like that. So here's our external safety. And then when we start pulling the trigger, we have a tiny bit of dead air and then get to a substantial wall. And then there's your pull, coming in a little over 6 pounds. So it's not terrifically heavy. I have to give it credit for that. And it's really a very smooth trigger. And then our reset all the way out there and then back out to the start. That is a long reset, and it's a long trigger pull as well. Again, just over 6 pounds, and notice that it goes all the way to the very back of the trigger housing. I'm not a fan of that. I've got long fingers, and this is a small gun, so that's a little bit problematic for me. And then our reset and a follow-up. Again, it's smooth. I have to give it credit there, no doubt about it. But I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not a fan of double action only triggers. That is not a thing for me. I know some people are. It's just not my cup of tea. So guys, what do I think of the Beretta APX Carry overall? Well, overall, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I like the ergos and grip texture quite a bit. The overall look of the gun with those big serrations, I've actually become quite a fan of. And I like the sight setup as well. There are also a couple of things I don't like about it. I don't like the disassembly. I don't like disassemblies where I have to find some other tool, like a shell casing or something like that, just to strip down the gun. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm not a fan of it personally. And then there's the trigger. I do not care for double action only triggers. Now, to give it credit, it's pretty smooth. It's not terrifically heavy, but it's not my kind of trigger. And the fact that it breaks all the way at the very end of the trigger housing, I'm not a fan of that either because I've got long fingers, so I just don't gel very well with guns like this. One last thing, the MSRP on the APX Carry is $450, so you'll be able to find it a little bit less than that. That's actually a pretty good deal for this gun. Now be sure to holler down below in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree and what your experience with the APX line is. I'm always looking forward to talking with you guys in the comments. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.